there are different growth strategies which B2B companies follow, which could be product led, marketing led, sales led. So what's your take on these, and how would you use them?
You're asking, what do I prefer? Well, it depends on the market. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle, is the users and the buyers and the channels where they transact will dictate the motion, right?
How do you know when you're like a product fit ready for your B2B product?
The simple answer is, I think there are metrics you can look at that are really good indicators that you have found something of value, right? And then I think there are misleading metrics. So I'll give you an example. I'm not a fan of revenue or even pipeline as a good indicator of that, because that to me is more a reflection on sales execution and what's happening in the market. But something like user adoption or retention or even net promoter score, those are pretty tried and true heuristics for somebody is getting value for this, right?
Cool. So we have talked a lot about storytelling, networking strategies and all, and maybe let's switch gears to your area of expertise, Ibrahim. So B2B, scaling B2B products, and that's your area, and you also have a Maven class regarding that. You talk a lot of different strategies there. So maybe could you throw some light on some strategies of scaling B2B products?
Yeah, I think I've worked in B2B, I would say it's like 7 years straight and probably collectively a decade. I would say my one core unifying thesis of B2B is repeatability. There is a serious tension in B2B between products and services. And sometimes you have product companies that fall into the services trap where they're like, oh, $1 million customer wants this. And you can get to 10 million. I have myself, right, selling $10 million deals, and then you don't really have a product. You have a collection of services engagements, right? And so that is the core tension. And so what is the difference between a product and a service? A service is custom built on demand, and a product is the same thing over and over, the same use case, the same buyer, the same problem, the same value, or for the most part with some tweaks, right? And so that's what I look for in B2B more than anything is, are you positioning the same way and again and again? Are you selling the same way again and again? Are people adopting the same way and again and again? Is it 80% of the features are used again and again, right? And if you have that, then you have a path to scaling. If you don't have that, scaling is a premature conversation. Now, the second part of that is, well, how do you know you have something worth scaling? That is the heart of what is the value proposition? What is the problem we're solving? Who else might be solving it? What is unique about the way we're solving it? How do we find the customers who will resonate with our approach to this problem? How do we repeatedly get them into our funnel and get them to be aware, try, buy, pay, upsell, renew, etc. Right? But to me, repeatability is the core thing you have to figure out.
I was just saying, like I've seen that continued. I'm in the B2B SaaS space comparatively. I mean, we do to like B2C customers as well, but again, primarily like B2B. We have seen those requests continually. Like an enterprise customer comes and says, "Hey, I want this specific thing," and you'll be like, "Hey, I'm looking at probably like a few $100,000 of revenue or like $1 million of revenue. Why don't I go ahead and build?" But you don't know if it's actually repeatable or not.
Yeah. So I'll give you two maybe conflicting thoughts about that. I think a lot of people get a little bit high and mighty and they're like, oh, I'm too smart to fall for this trap. I'm going to ignore the $1 million deal. I'm not saying ignore $1 million deal. I'm saying ask whether it's repeatable. Ask whether it's like the first of many or not, right? Then second is, if it is the first of many, is that a better segment market to go after? And are you positioned to go after it, right? Or is the wrong buyer showing up at your doorstep? So there's nothing wrong with those $1 million deals, but I think when they're not repeatable and you fool yourself into thinking they're repeatable is when you start to do very dangerous things.
Asking the right question and to the right people to make sure it's reusable. Repeatable. Yeah.
In my experience at Amazon as a B2B product manager, so I was supporting the B2B payment space. So I had my own experience in this where like we had to set up our own like whole 3 to 4 folks to just support enterprise customers. Once we found out that that was very important for the enterprise related teams.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not opposed to doing custom things for the enterprise, but that should be NRR. It should be professional services engagements, and you treat them for what they are, right? Occasional revenue that is not repeatable and scalable, right? I'll mention one other thing. I'll give you an anecdote. I worked with a salesperson who's probably like the best salesperson I've ever worked with. And I went on a customer meeting with him once, and somebody prepared me, and they said, "Don't be shocked when he brings out his customer pitch deck." And I couldn't resist, so I asked him before. I was like, "Hey, can I see your customer pitch deck?" And he sent it to me, and it was one slide. It was like one simple slide. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, where's the roadmap? Where's the differentiator? And he's like, no. From this slide, I tell you, this is the world, and this is what's happening, and this is where you are, and where you say you want to go, and this is the path to get there. I'm kind of butchering the story, but basically he was like, from this one side, I can tell him everything about why we exist as a company, what our product philosophy is. Now, is this in your feature set? When is it in your roadmap? Those are all secondary concerns. But he's like, selling is about, do you agree with my view of the world? And do you want to join forces? Right. And the reason I bring that up is he had made it ultra repeatable. Because if you immediately were like, actually, I don't think the world is moving to cloud, I don't believe in mobile, then it's like, okay, we're done. Right. So he's like, the pitch deck encapsulated all the core tenets of our company strategy and product philosophy. And if people bought in, great. And if they didn't, like, he was all about repeatably qualifying customers, right? From a sales perspective.
Yeah, for a startup which I used to work, we salespeople used to call them battle cards. They used to have a battle card for every persona, and they used to they know what they ask, and they have everything in the same place. So yeah.
Yeah. One of the things which I also have seen, experienced myself is building relationship with these all B2B companies, like when you're scaling the product or building product, which is, I feel like, very different from the way we build relationships like with the B2C style, because a lot of, especially the B2B in the space, we haven't, I think you covered this before, like there's $1 million deals, multi-million dollars deals. So it's very important to have that relationship, as well as take that and build that trust. Like, any strategies or things that you think were helpful when engaging with B2B companies?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is the fundamental difference between B2B and B2C is you have multiple customers in B2B. You have the end user of the product, you have the buyer of the product, and you probably have a person who is responsible for configuring or administering the product. So most B2B products have probably 3 personas on equal footing. And it's very, very important to understand in your vertical domain who has the power. What I mean by that is there are certain tools in which, let's say you're in security products, the admin has the power, right? Doesn't matter. Users are like, oh, the security product is so hard to use. It's nobody cares, because the admin has the power saying we cannot risk a breach, right? If you think about collaboration B2B software, Slack or Office or something, the end user has the power, because if they complain and say this is inefficient and unusable, then the buyer gets in trouble. They're like, oh, you slowed down our workforce, right? And so it's very, very important in B2B to remember there are multiple users and there is a stack ranking of those users, right? So to think about it, that's number one. Number two, and this is going to hurt every product person, sometimes activation, adoption, usage don't actually matter in B2B, because a lot of B2B products are break in case of emergency, right? They're only used when they are needed, right? Oh, it's my once a year payroll reporting software. Oh, it's my compliance audit software. And so everything you're taught about product of like get adoption, get engagement, move the metrics up and right, some of those products are less about usage and adoption and more about workflow completion, right? Is when the workflow is started, how often is it successfully completed, right? Just think of a software that maybe you don't think of as B2B, but really it's like a business of one, like tax filing software, Intuit, right? It's like, when I go to file my taxes, I want to finish it successfully, right? Other than that, I'm never going to open this up again, right? So that's 2. And then 3, I actually, I don't know if you guys have ever talked to Shreyas Doshi. He writes a lot about B2B as well. One of the things he writes about is start with the assumption that the company that you're selling to, trying to get adoption in, they don't care. Like, they're not waking up saying, oh, today I need to buy some B2B software and use some B2B software and configure some B2B software. And so those are all jobs they didn't want, right? And so your job is to make those jobs as frictionless and as simple as possible. I have a blog post that I've written that I love this analogy. It's about death and taxes in B2B. And there are certain taxes that every B2B product makes you pay, right? The setup tax, the governance tax, the collaboration tax, right? And you have to really think about, in my space, what are the taxes I want to remove and what are the taxes I want to put on the customer, right? Because that's where the competitor is going to come in. If your product is really easy to set up and use, right, but really hard to integrate with other products that people use, your competition is going to come and work on the integration, right? If your product is like amazing once you get the learning curve, you're going to see a competitor come along and say, oh, I have a simpler get started plan, right? And so that's the thing to think about, is understand the buyer, the user, and the admin, and figure out how you might approach them in a way that that gives them value.
Awesome. Yeah, for anybody who's listening, we'll link the Substack post which Ibrahim is talking about, and also his Substack in the description below. So, just a follow up, right? So there is, as we talked about acquisition and all, and there are different growth strategies which B2B companies follow, which could be product led, marketing led, sales led. So what's your take on these, and how would you use them? Do you intermix them? Do you prefer a specific strategy?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One is I actually, it's not me. I think there's consensus that there's about 4 types of go-to-market strategies. There is self-serve, which is somebody's going to swipe a credit card. There is inside sales, which is customers come to you mostly fully baked and you just take their order. There is direct sales, outbound, which is you have to go manufacture the customer. You have to take them to dinner and invite them to the conference and cold call them and blah, blah, blah. And there is partner channel sales, which is I just build a thing and I have these partners who sell this stuff. Those are the 4 kinds of motions. And if you take any B2B company, a significant portion of their revenue will primarily be from one, even if they have all 4, right? So I can give you a successful company in every example. Salesforce, primarily enterprise direct sales. Atlassian, primarily partner sales, right? I don't know. Stripe, probably all direct sales, right? So it doesn't mean you can't have revenue in each bucket, but one bucket will be an outsized impact. That's number 1. Number 2, juggling multiple motions is going to break the company. It's very, very hard to do 2 different things, right? It's kind of like being like, are you an Olympic level sprinter or marathon runner? It's like, well, it's really hard to be both, right? I have to specialize. So that's number 2. Number 3 is you're asking, what do I prefer? Well, it depends on the market. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle, is the users and the buyers and the channels where they transact will dictate the motion, right? If you are like, no, I'm going to do it in a different way, you have to innovate not only at a product level, but at a go-to-market level, right? For example, I'll just give you a simple example. You're like, I'm in the mobile games business. And it's like, how do you sell your mobile games? Well, I have a website and people come and they download and they side load the mobile game on their device. Like, good luck, right? Because if you're in the mobile games business, you'd better be selling your mobile games on the iOS App Store and the Android Marketplace. That is the channel where your customers choose to transact, right? And so I think it's very, very important to understand your buyers and their buying motion. I'll give you a simple example. A lot of people in B2B, they find analyst relations distasteful. Gartner, Forrester, IDC. They're like, why do I have to deal with these people? I've built the best product. The best product should speak for itself. And it's like, well, actually, your buyers read those reports. They call them in and say, I'm trying to buy software in category X. Who should I do in my RFP? Right? And so you can like it or dislike it, but the reality is they are dictating the terms of evaluation, right? And so it's very, very important. And so to answer your question, Srinath, is what do I prefer? I prefer to maximize the channel that my buyers and users are living in, right?
Maybe start with a channel and then see what is working for you, and then based on the market, you tweak it. Cool.
Yeah. And now, if you can invent a channel or control a channel, then you're going to be a huge, huge platform, right? But that doesn't happen overnight.
Awesome. Sounds good.
One of the questions which we like challenges that we often face is, how do we know when we have hit a product market fit for a B2B product? Like, and also, as we know, the B2B, every probably company is different, and the type of industry probably it's different. Maybe if you are scaling that to a new country, then the requirements are different. Like, how do you know when you're like a product fit ready for your B2B product?
Yeah. So there's actually a great article. It's a very long article. It's called A Quantitative Approach to Product Market Fit. I think it's by either Thrive Capital or Tribe Capital. I can't remember. I'll send it to you guys. You can link it. I really enjoyed that article because it breaks down quantitatively how you can measure product market fit. But the simple answer is, I think there are metrics you can look at that are really good indicators that you have found something of value. right? And then I think there are misleading metrics. So I'll give you an example. I'm not a fan of revenue or even pipeline as a good indicator of that, because that to me is more a reflection on sales execution and what's happening in the market. But something like user adoption or retention or even net promoter score, those are pretty tried and true heuristics for somebody is getting value for this, right? And you can end up in a situation where you have product market fit, but you don't have commercial success. So I'm specifically answering your question. I tend to look at retention and retention related metrics to be like, do we truly have product market fit, right? But you can have product market fit and still fail commercially because you don't have go to market fit. So retention is how I think about it, and subsidiaries and flavors of retention is where I tend to gravitate.
Actually, I have one question on the other side of B2B, right? Like B2B could take off like really well if you get the right customers, get the right products for them, and like you said, understand the right persona who dictates how your product needs to be there, right? I want to understand the challenges part of it. Like, can you shed some light on like some big challenges that you faced in the past and probably like how you overcame
I
and
would
built the
say,
product?
there's actually a quote that I love by Rumi, which is truth is a mirror that fell and shattered on the ground into a million pieces. And everybody picked up a shard and said, I have the truth. And that's what B2B software is. Sales is coming to you and saying, this feature is the missing piece. Demo engineering has a different view. Support team has a different view. Product has a different view. Engineering has a different view. There's so many versions of the truth. And so that is the hardest part of B2B. And this is where product judgment comes in, is they're all true. They're all true. But what is going to be the great unifying universal truth, the repeatable truth, right? That's where the product judgment comes in. And so what I try to do is avoid premature fixation on any one solution. What I try to do is say, like, every version of this story that I'm getting, what makes them feel like it's true, and what would have to be true in the market for this to be the beginning of a successful scaling, right? And which of those versions of truth do I believe? And what if you do that exercise, you will probably find better strategies. But number two, you will then figure out disconnects between the best strategy and your current company and funding investment. So you might find, you know what, this salesperson is right. This is the thing we should do, but we have a problem. That's not where our investments are. That's not where our differentiators are. That's not our positioning. That's not our pricing. That's not our messaging, right? And so that's, I would say, the real art of B2B. And that's honestly why I enjoy B2B more than B2C is you have a smaller segment of people who are giving you incomplete information, and you really need to make some judgment calls on it, right? And that's why I think being really good about hearing what's not being said in research calls, understanding what's not being communicated in the win notes, deciphering what's not being spelled out in the churn notes is really, really interesting as a B2B product manager.
One of the things which I often found useful was listening to some of the calls between the B2B customers and the professional services teams, because a lot of times, I mean, things during translation get lost when they are cutting tickets or something. But to your point, some of the because sometimes I feel like these customer facing teams come with a feature ask, like they want this, versus telling me what is the exact problem that the user is facing. So as a PM, we can think about what is that feature that will help solve the pain point, because otherwise I'm predetermined to focus just on the feature that the sales is saying versus looking at the customer pain point. But those calls have been really helpful for me to think from pain point standpoint rather than directly going and building a feature.
Yeah, I mean, in my world, when a PM is doing that, we call it being solution led, where you've prematurely decided, oh, this is the solution, and you've kind of lost track on the problem. In fact, one of my sort of things I pressure test every once in a while is there are 3 types of product work in B2B. One is we know the problem, we are pretty solid on the solution, we just need to ship it, right? The second, and so that is the majority of what is happening. People are like, we know the problem, we know the solution, ship, right? There's a second kind of work, which is, hey, here's a problem that we've historically not invested in or ignored, and we need to carve out some time, right? This is expansion, adjacency, market is shifting, right? Problems are being shuffled. And so that is, I would say, the secondary type of work. So basically there's core product and then there's add-on products. But there's a third kind of product work that rarely happens, and your competitor does it for you and you get disrupted, and then you're like, oh, I should have done this product work, which is, we think this is the problem. We think this is the solution. In fact, we have invested quarters and years into the solution, but maybe we got the problem wrong. Maybe we have an incomplete understanding of the problem. Maybe we need to abandon the thing that got us here and go all the way back to the root problem and revisit the thing, right? And that's very, very rare to do because you're so committed to your existing product service. And I think that type of product work happens in pure innovation and competition. And then you're like, oh man, we talked about this, but we never did it. And then you get disrupted, right? So I think as a B2B product leader, you should always be making sure like how much of my investment of my roadmap is going into solutions that I've, predetermined, new problems, and then new solutions to old problems.
That's right. And sometimes, you could just be heads down building stuff and not know what the bigger picture is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's a concept. I made this up. I call it skip step SaaS. The idea is basically the prevailing wisdom becomes, this is the job. Job is ABC. And then somebody comes along and says, I don't think you have to do B. I don't think B is required. I'm just going to automate B. And then the entire world overnight moves and people are like, oh my God, why did nobody think of that, right? I'll give you a simple example. I use this product called Loom, right? Loom, basically you do async recording and it uploads as you're recording and then you just send the person the Loom. It's a really simple but powerful technical innovation. And we're using it right now with Riverside, which is to upload as you record. But before somebody started doing this, everybody was like, what you do is you record, you save, you send, and then they download. And that's a lot of friction and failure points, right? And with that simple skipping of record, download, upload, share, you've completely changed the way most video-based workflows now work, right? And so but if you're pot committed to that view, you're never going to go back and say, hey, I wonder if we even have to record and locally save the file, right? That's a dangerous question to ask if you've built all this infrastructure that does that.
Awesome. I know I'd say this was a power-packed session. I would call it that. Thanks a lot, Ibrahim. So before we close, what we do is we ask our guests to share, some books they like or podcasts they listen to with our viewers. Like what would be some of them?
I've not listened to too many of your episodes. I've listened to a couple, so I may give you a strange, unconventional answer. I look for product lessons outside product content all the time. And so the book I'll give you is not necessarily a product management or even a business leadership book. It's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's one of my favorite books. It basically is a thesis on the importance of focus, prioritization, and choosing, right? Focusing on what is essential and everything else is non-essential. And I think that is the thing that brings down a lot of leaders and teams and companies is the inability to choose and the inability to focus, right? And so I'm a big fan of a decent strategy well executed is better than a perfect strategy that you talked about for 5 years, right? And so essentialism to me is almost like a life philosophy, and it's how I focus on like what is the core reason we exist as a business and what are we doing every single day to move that forward. Everything else is noise. Everything else is noise, right? And so it almost is like ruthless prioritization brought to life, right? And it can be sort of uncomfortable for people because it involves taking a stance and saying no. But I think that is what the market demands sometimes. I have a friend who deals with customer escalations. He's a very interesting guy, and he tells me funny things from time to time. And he's like, no product team will do this. But he's like, I almost want you to label all the customer feedback requests as like now, next, later, never. Like never. He's like, I want never as a category. And he's like, nobody will do it. But he's like, how clear would that be to your customers? It's like, we are never going to do this because it is philosophically misaligned with how we view things, right? And so that to me is the crux of essentialism. So I love essentialism. In terms of podcasts, honestly, to go back to the beginning of the discussion of like, hey, how do I get from principal to director? To me, when you're getting at that level, it's much less about product craft and much more about unlocking the potential of people and getting people to collaborate and engage in ways that they're unfamiliar and unaccustomed to. So I would say I honestly listen to a lot of psychology and like neuroscience type podcasts and that kind of stuff. So, one I've listened to from time to time is like Esther Perel or Brene Brown, and I'll sort of just understand what makes people tick and try to apply those. So I'll give you a simple example. I listened to a neuroscience podcast a long time ago that talks about this model called SCARF. They basically deconstructed people and said SCARF defines every kind of people. SCARF is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And I read it now. That has nothing to do with work, but I couldn't get it out of my head. And then I like Terminator, I would like see people and I'd be like, oh, status driven person, fairness driven person. And it almost helped me like manage and mentor people, because a lot of times you as a manager start trying to apply the same playbook to different people, but the reality is people are different. And I'm not saying there's 5 kind of people, but I'm saying people have a core trait that they exhibit. Like we've all have the person who's like, how do I get to this level? That's a status driven person, right? You all have the person, it's like, how do we know we're all going to have jobs tomorrow? That's a certainty driven person. How do I know I'm going to be a part of a team? That's a relatedness driven person. Tell me what to do and get the hell out of my way. That's an autonomy driven person. Hey, why do they make more than me? That's a fairness driven person. And so I try to apply these kinds of concepts. So I would say any kind of pop psychology stuff is a go-to podcast for me.
Actually, I'm very interested in psychology. Maybe we should do a psychology podcast with Ibrahim. But yeah, thanks a lot for sharing all of that information, Ibrahim. Thanks for spending your time, and it was truly a power-packed podcast. And we'll actually link all the resources which you talked about in the description below, and also we'll give your LinkedIn and places where people can reach out to you. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And appreciate all the thoughtful questions, and thank you so much, guys, for having me on the podcast.
Thank you very much again for your time.
Bye.